I'm Sarah Godwin. I'm the mother of Quentin Godwin, who went missing in New Zealand in May 1992 when he was 18 years old. I'm looking at a black and white photo of Quentin when he was probably about 18 months old, and we were living in England at the time, in the New Forest. And just looking at him, he's got gorgeous curly blonde hair. He was the perfect little baby because he was chubby, he was placid. He was my second child, so I was very appreciative of having a placid child. And he was generally a happy baby and a happy little toddler. In this photo, he's looking up at the up at the camera, up at the person behind the camera probably, and he's got a lovely little smile on his face with his long golden curly locks. He and his sister were close in age. They were about 16 months apart. They were good playmates most of the time. Like children, they also squabbled. But this was before we left England to go and live in New Zealand. So it was sort of, it was a time with some pain attached because I didn't want to leave England particularly. My parents adored having the children close by, but we did. We left in 1975 when Q was 2 years old. So it's probably his last summer in England. I've got a photo now of all the family, and that's my 4 children plus my stepson and my stepdaughter, and my husband's in this photo. And it's taken on Quentin's 10th birthday, so that would be July 1983. And we're on the beach. This is a lovely beach area in New Zealand called Cornwallis, where we often used to go with the children because it had an amazing big grassed area that you could have picnics, and we've got a barbecue cooking in the background. So I'm sure we had something hot to eat. There's probably a very homemade chocolate cake on the table. And so other objects which I can't quite make out what they are. They look like oranges, but I can't think I took oranges on a birthday picnic. And I can see our little dog's ears sticking up in the corner above the table. So Q's sitting there with his stepbrother, who was his best friend from the age of 3 on one side of him. Then there's his 2 little sisters, and behind his 2 big sisters with his stepfather. I just noticed his stepfather is wearing a jumper, which I hand-spun all the wool and knitted it for him. It was a real labour of love. He may even still have it. So I'm sure that was a really enjoyable occasion for all the family because it's somewhere we knew well, and it was a very happy place to be, although Q's birthday was July. So in New Zealand, obviously, that's winter time, which is why we've got jumpers and clothes on, thick clothes on. I've obviously been taking this photo because I'm not in it. But it's a lovely one to look at with all the family when they were young and happy and together. The photo I have now is of Quentin sitting in a garden chair in my parents' garden. This is August 1990, when all the family had come to England to celebrate my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. So that was us from New Zealand, 5 children and parents, my older brother from America with his wife and 2 boys, and my brothers in England. So it was a big family gathering, the one and only time we all ever got together. And the garden was lovely. It was my children's sort of favourite place to be in England because they did get to stay with my parents quite a lot, considering we were in New Zealand. Quentin and his older sister Emma had come over on their own and stayed for about 6 weeks when they were 11 and 12, and my younger children also had come over as unaccompanied. So they knew Petworth and they knew the area really well and loved to go over the wall and into Petworth Park. And Quentin at this stage would have been 17. And he looks really relaxed and chilled out and happy. He's just looking over his shoulder with a nice expression on his face. The reason this photo sort of speaks to me so often, it's one of my favourite photos of Quentin, is that it was A, taken in my parents' garden, which was, as I say, a happy place, but B, I suppose it was the last summer before he became fairly seriously ill with bipolar problems, and it was on the journey back to New Zealand after this trip that we stopped off in Malaysia for 5 days, I think, as a family. And Quentin, I know, was entertained one night by this Malaysian guy who'd offered to be our guide, and you could smell the dope coming out of the hut that they were in. We were in a campsite, and it's my guess that that strong dope was probably what triggered his bipolar problems, because it was not long after we were back in New Zealand living at home again that Q started to show signs of being manic. He suddenly sort of seemed to have these bursts of energy where he'd start a project in the garden or in the house or a school project or something, and he'd sort of say, I'm going to do this, this and this. And we all thought, oh, that's amazing, yeah, go for it. But then he'd never finish it before he got on to the next one. And it took a few weeks to realise that things weren't quite as good as they seemed, and he was diagnosed as bipolar and had a severe manic episode about 4 months after we got back from England. So this is sort of a photo of the before time when life still seemed to hold all sorts of possibilities for him. So it's both a sad and a happy photo. All right, I have my photo now of Quentin sitting at our dining table, and I'm guessing it's a special occasion because there seems to be quite a lot of food. I don't think it's Christmas, but I can't tell from this photo. He's got a tin of Steinlager in front of him. And it's just a photo of Quentin. Nobody else is in the frame. And he's looking very thoughtful, looking down and looking, I don't know if I can say he's looking depressed, but he's certainly looking a little isolated. I wouldn't have a clue what was going through his mind, but I think this was taken in probably late 1991, which would be about 6 months before he went missing. And it's probably showing that his mood generally was not a happy one, because he'd had the manic episode and he'd been diagnosed as bipolar, which he found very difficult for a teenage boy who's trying to fit in with his peers. To know that there's some mental illness in those days, and probably still nowadays, is a hard one to live with. So he didn't find it easy after his illness, even when he was apparently normal again. And I think this photo sort of epitomizes the fact that here's a young person who doesn't look as carefree as he maybe should. He looks fairly woebegone, thoughtful. And at this time, Q, I think, was trying to help himself by being very involved with the outdoors. He did a lot of gardening at home. We had a big garden. He loved growing vegetables, and he loved keeping bees. He'd kept bees since he was 11 years old, when he'd had a hive for his birthday present at his request. and learnt beekeeping from a cousin down the road. So he was trying his best to find natural therapy in the outdoors, in his bees, but I think it was still a struggle. And looking back, I wish we had realised how much of a struggle it was for him, because he could have done with more help than he got. But in those days, very little was really read or said about manic depression, bipolar, whichever they called it. But definitely for Q it was a difficult road, and this photo is rather a sad one.